The advantage here is that I am of the opinion that quantum computers will eventually become reality, and
I think we'll always have this kind of transparent pool issue in a way, even though once you zoom in, there are a lot of specific problems with transparent pool.
if someone bought ZEC in 2016, chucked it into the ground and has not paid attention to the network for the last decade and will not pay attention for the next 50 years, then they are very likely going to lose their funds.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this in-person version of Shielded Dialogues. We're here in Prague for the ECC Summit and just finished up meetings today and thought it would be fun to do an episode in person. Today we're going to be talking about something a bit spicy, whether or not Zcash should deprecate the transparent pool. I'm joined with Strad, who's a core protocol engineer for the Electric Coin Company.
Hello.
And Nate, who is lead engineer at Shielded Labs. How are you guys doing today?
Hello. Doing pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah. A little on the tighter side, tided. There we go. It is. These are always great. They are also very taxing on the brain, but that's why we're here.
That's right. So to start off, do you want to give just a quick 2-minute summary of what your position is on this issue of deprecating the transparent pool?
Well, my position is we should deprecate the transparent pool. I think that the benefits that we had with the transparent pool at launch were useful at the time, but I think that we have sufficient capabilities in the shielded protocols to meet what the transparent protocols are currently providing. Certainly in terms of the protocol, maybe not quite in terms of implementations, but that's an engineering problem, and that now is as good a time as any to be starting the process of thinking about what we need to do to move in that direction. Nate?
All right. Yeah, my position is a little more nuanced because for a few reasons. But so first of all, as a technologist, I would love to retire the transparent pool. It's based on the original Bitcoin tech that we inherited when we forked Bitcoin Core before launching. But in terms of a big picture direction for Zcash, I don't see the transparent pool itself as necessarily an issue, even though there are issues with it that are more detailed at a more detailed level. So I could be in favor of turning it off if we had good functional replacements for everything, but I don't see it as a very high priority currently.
Okay, Nate, let's start with some historical context. Why was the transparent pool included in the original launch? And was there ever any expectation or something stated that it would eventually be deprecated or removed over time?
Yeah. So why was it included in launch? For these why rationale questions, it's always interesting because if you ask different people, they might have different responses. So even when people think they're on the same page about something, they might discover later that they had different assumptions. But initially it was completely necessary practically because when we launched with Sprout as the shielded technology, it required minutes on a laptop to generate a shielded transaction.
2 gigabytes of memory per each time you're making a proof.
Yeah, so it was really heavyweight, which is kind of fun because you could warm up your lap by hitting send. So that was one practical reason. Another practical reason is we had forked from Bitcoin Core, and the reason for that was a little bit historical. It's because the research team, the 7 scientists who developed the Zero Cash research, had used that for their prototype, and it's because they initially were interested in upgrading Bitcoin to add privacy. So for that approach, it makes a lot of sense that they wanted to figure out a way to introduce shielding into an existing Bitcoin protocol. A third practical reason was just there was already a lot of Bitcoin infrastructure and code that we felt like we could use or leverage, and also that users or like vendors or infrastructure developers like that could use. And then I guess a fourth kind of practical reason is it was sort of a known working thing, known working functionality. So if there were problems after launch with the shielded stuff, it may provide a useful fallback or things like that. So those are all the practical reasons. Was there an expectation or intention to remove it? I don't remember very well. I do know that ever since the beginning, there was always discussions of like, if we could just make things fully shielded, what, benefits could that have? But I think initially, because of all those practical reasons, I don't remember having a specific intention to like turn it off. And I guess if we did, it would have seemed like something way down the road, because at that time, we didn't even know if how much more efficient proving could be and so forth.
Yeah, we certainly, like, one of the things that definitely was a struggle was the fact that, like, for instance, if you're making a shielded shielded Sprout transaction, the default RPCs, JSON RPCs that Bitcoin had would time out. So, like, a lot of the ways in which exchanges and mining pools and things worked with the existing Bitcoin-style RPCs just weren't compatible with a proving system that just took that long and was that heavy to use. Their mining nodes that ran their Bitcoin nodes you'd have to rent something a lot more powerful to run those. So in the context of Sprout, it absolutely made sense to have some other way, some intermediate buffer to be able to do this. But I will also point out that right from the beginning, we took the perspective that all Zcash should start out shielded. And so that's why the consensus rules from the beginning had a rule in there that if you mined transparent, and again, at the beginning, you could only mine transparent because, again, Sprout proofs were heavy, your Coinbase outputs, the first thing they must do is be shielded. You must take each Coinbase output and spend it in entirety with no change into the shielded pool. And that was meant to be a way to sort of bootstrap the initial value of the pool. Of course, what we saw in practice was that miners would take it into the shielded pool and then take it straight out of the shielded pool. And you could just directly count, like, you could see the amount going in and the amount going out minus fee. And there are papers that looked at that and went, cool, we can just track straight through those, which is why you get your privacy from storing funds in the shielded pool.
Okay, so what are the strongest reasons, Strat, in your opinion, for deprecating the transparent pool? Are they technical, ethical, economic?
So like, as Nathan was saying before, like, you ask this to different people, you get different answers, and I'm going to try and make sure I represent all of them where I can, but I feel strongly most of them. Technical is a big one. The cost of maintaining transparent support is very heavy for what is really a very small team managing this. One of the things that we're trying to do right now is get a new 7 out, and that is blocked on deprecating Zcash and there's LA stuff, which I'm sure your audience has heard about at some point in this. And a thing that's blocking that is full support for the Bitcoin scripting system in Rust. Now, there do exist Bitcoin script systems implemented in Rust, but they were implemented years after we forked and it contained a bunch of additional logic and changes and things from Bitcoin that they added after we forked that Zcash doesn't have, so they aren't consensus compatible. We also made changes to the Bitcoin scripting system before launch, like removing, was it the code separator, I think was an opcode we removed. I mean, there were some other changes we made. Basically, some things that Bitcoin had always wanted to do, we just did some cleanups of that initially. And that also provides a distinction there. So we're having to implement all of that from scratch. We've got some very good people on it, and we're making good progress. But that's been like months of extra work just to get to the point of being able to have that fully represented in Rust. So things like that are additional technical load for us as an ecosystem to take on and maintain. That is costly. We also have the security burden, whereby the overall surface of the Zcash protocol and of the Zcash ecosystem, there are more things we have to consider every time a new protocol update is made. When a new feature like Orchard comes in, or ZSAs, or there are so many features I can't even think of another one to name right now. But the surface that we have to consider from a security perspective, and the libraries we have to consider, we have to keep track of dependencies that work transparent in addition to everything else. Like there's additional complexity on that side as well, that a small team it's difficult to a small team of core contributors, it's difficult to manage. Then there's the I guess maybe that's what you mean by ethical, but Zcash users, not always, but quite often come to Zcash for privacy. I would argue with the price action that we've had for the last few years, the ones who are around here are very likely here for the privacy. But we have had multiple times seen users who come to Zcash and go, "Yay, I'm so glad to be having my nice private funds," and then someone points out they're using a transparent address.
Yeah,
and they didn't realize.
Exactly.
It's a UX nightmare to explain to people that certain things are transparent and certain things are not. And we were, to be honest, a bit naive at the beginning, thinking that, we'll just make a T address with a T in front, and that will be transparent, and then a Z address, and that'll be shielded. And as things have gotten more complex, and we have unified addresses, which currently can contain transparent addresses, there's a proposal now to make a revision to that so that they can't. But the more surface that users need to think about, from a privacy perspective, the harder it is for them to be able to correctly model what it is that they're doing. Or in the case of users who aren't doing that kind of modeling, the harder it is for us to give them the best privacy they can while also still being able to interact with the full ecosystem. So surface area on technical work, security work, privacy work, all of that is just, it's additional cost. And then the final thing I would say is that the reasons that we had transparent were in many parts that we didn't have equivalent functionality in shielded. Okay. So we initially talked about performance. Well, we've got that now. Sapling gave us that performance, 10 times faster proving, 90% less memory. Orchard maintained that while also getting rid of the trusted setup. And so performance, you're fine on that now. Multisig, that was if you look at how scripts are used on the Zcash network, the vast majority, if not everything currently, is like 2 or 3 multisig, 5 or 7 multisig, that kind of thing. Thanks to the work that the Zcash Foundation did productionizing the work of Chelsea Comlow, Ian Goldberg on Frost, we now have shielded multisig as an option. And there's work being done to productionize that in the rest of the year. So that's now on track as an option for people. And when it comes to disclosure aspects, the Sapling and Orchard protocols in particular, Sprout was a little bit more iffy, but the Sapling and Orchard protocols have had payment disclosure mechanisms available in the protocol for ages. There is stuff that hasn't been built in terms of actually having an API you can call to get a disclosure thing, but that's just engineering work. That can be scheduled, that can be done, and now we have the ability for someone to go, nope, if you are asking what's in this transaction, I can prove to you that I was the person who sent that transaction, and this is what it contains. It is possible to make those disclosures from the shielded protocol.
Okay. Nate, do you want to respond to any of those points?
Sure. Yeah, so, I wanted to add on to some. So
okay.
On the technical front, the Bitcoin script is a constrained smart contracting system. But then it's like more expressive than is necessarily allowed in practice. And like Strad said, we only see one specific kind of use so far on chain with it.
Yeah, there's a smattering of others, but most of that was in the early days.
Right. So it's a lot of complexity just to do like this one application. And also the Bitcoin developers have a different philosophy than we do because it seems like they always highly prioritize backwards compatibility, like no matter what, including only relying on soft forks. Whereas we believe, hard forks are fine and good as long as users have a choice of which fork to take and they're protected from problems around forking. And so because of that, in other areas besides the transparent stuff, we can evolve our protocols and our technology much more nimbly and like cleanly. So I just wanted to add those on the on the technical front. One of the sticking points for me is around the usability issue. So it is true the stories of people showing up with transparent Zcash, believing that they have privacy. But I'm of the opinion that to have good privacy, it really the wallet is the linchpin. That's part of it. And then the other part is I think people are always going to want to be interacting with the outside world in various ways. And those will always present at a very high level generalization, the same kinds of challenges as we have with transparent. So like, today there's, bridges to near, where you can do near DeFi or
Maya protocol.
there's Maya protocol. There's an Avalanche bridge in development, and all of those systems, if Zcashers want to use them, they have to send funds out of the shielded pool to interact with something and come back. And furthermore, they need to use tools to do it. And a really nice experience would be they have one wallet that lets them do the full thing that they want to do. That might be challenging often in practice. In my experience, like bridging between networks and stuff, you need to use like multiple tools, and it's a big pain. And those other tools are unlikely to provide good privacy. So, but I still think users should be able to connect to those things if they want to. And so we'll always have this challenge of like educating them about what the privacy risks are of different behaviors, and then wallets doing their best to protect users' privacy. So again, at a very high level, I think we'll always have this kind of transparent pool issue in a way, even though once you zoom in, there are a lot of specific problems with transparent pool, like people getting confused about different address types or things of that nature. There's one other piece on my mind that isn't about like usability. It's just sort of like a product thing. So I noticed the chart of the size of the shielded pool recently, and it's sort of like doing an S-curve up, which is really awesome to see. And I think I'm guessing it's related to Zashi and hardware wallet support. And so the interesting thing about that for me is that going from transparent to shielded Zcash is different from buying Zcash from another asset. And since we sort of see those two things separately, we can see the shielded pool going up, which doesn't mean people are buying Zcash necessarily, but it does mean people who have Zcash are shielding it. And that's just a really interesting thing to be able to see. And it's a really positive sign in my book, because one criticism I've heard through the years is that there's not really a demand for privacy. But this is an example, in my opinion, of it seems like there is demand, and the bottleneck has been like usable products that can support that. So, I mean, that's not necessarily an argument for not getting rid of the transparent pool, but it is interesting that it's something we can learn about because there's a transparent pool today.
Yeah. You make a good point on the fact that other chains and other coins elsewhere are effectively like, it's sort of like a global transparent pool, because everything asterisk is transparent in crypto. To gross approximation, everything is transparent. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Zcash ecosystem itself needs to pay the cost of that transparency. But you are correct that wallets could maybe combine the way that they handle transparent ZEC with like cross-chain transparency. That would be an interesting thing to pursue from a wallet perspective. And from that perspective, I would also be happy if then it became it is just shielded Zcash and then other transparent stuff that you're able to do, and then we can just turn off the transparent Zcash part and just keep the other stuff.
Nate, so what are some other significant risks or downsides to deprecating the transparent pool?
Well, yeah, one of the big things that's always been a concern for me is just wondering how much Zcash usage and adoption hinges on using transparent stuff. It's definitely the case that we know anecdotally that it's often easy for companies or groups or developers who are doing multi-coin stuff. They often already are doing stuff with Bitcoin or Bitcoin forks. And so it's fairly easy for them to port the Bitcoin stuff. And I am wondering how much that's true as time goes on, because we are deviating more and more from Bitcoin. And also, when we launched in 2016, that was the age of altcoins.
Yeah.
And maybe those aren't nearly as relevant anymore. So the challenge, though, for me is always understanding who's using Zcash and in what ways, and who is depending on something. There could be services or products that are using transparent where it would be relatively easy for them to transition to shielded. Let's say they're not relying specifically on Bitcoin functionality, and it's easy for them to change their integration. And that would be awesome, because then if we retired transparent, hopefully all of that class would just turn on shielded support. Or there could also be lots of users who support transparent currently, and switching to shielded is just too different from their current integration. So it'd be a lot of effort. And then some of those might just decide it's not worth it to continue supporting Zcash, or others might still think it's worth it, but just take a long time, drag their feet, etc. So the challenge is knowing how bad would that be?
Well, the big one there is exchanges, right? Because there's no exchange that lists shielded ZEC or supports shielded ZEC.
Right.
So, I mean, we want Zcash to be accessible. And if we cut off exchanges because there were regulatory reasons or technical reasons that they couldn't support shielded ZEC, then, that could damage that.
Yeah. Yep. Regulation is another whole topic. And I personally, I feel like it's a thing that we need to grapple with practically, but I just kind of don't agree with a lot of regulation because, because I respect people's privacy, and I think there are ways to, it's challenging, but I do think there are ways to still aim for the goals behind regulation that don't rely on silly rules. So like for me, a silly rule is like a transparent chain is acceptable, but not a shielded chain, because uh, uh, it just doesn't it doesn't fit my worldview that people will have their own self-custodial wallets. Anyone can make one. Anyone can like bridge between all the cryptos, and the regulations don't seem like they'll be effective in the long run, because I believe privacy is inevitable and everyone will like expect and demand it at some point in the future.
So another downside that that I've heard expressed is the usage of Zcash as a long-term store. So I would say that at the moment, I would say the payments flows in Zcash are sort of on the rise and becoming quite popular in recent years as wallet support has improved. But there are definitely at least a subset of users who have treated Zcash as I can invest in Zcash, I can buy some Zec, put it in a key, put that key in a block of concrete in my backyard or in someone else's backyard, and I'm going to come back in 10 years. That to some extent has always been a bit of a misplaced perspective, because of the fact that we do hard forking consensus changes. We make changes to the consensus rules all the time for a variety of reasons, including for security. And we care a lot about the security of the users of Zcash. And so that means that we need the capability to, for example, deprecate and disable a shielded pool. For instance, we had the problem with the Sprout pool with the counterfeiting bug. We fortunately had the bandwidth to introduce, swap it out with a new proving system circuit implementation. But there can be other kinds of bugs which maybe an individual pool, is too risky to keep around in respect to the risk it imposes on the rest of Zcash. So we need some mechanism to be able to do that. And indeed, before launch, there were blog posts talking about how certainly on the shielded side, definitely we would need the ability to do these deprecations. So I would argue, though, that I would posit that most people who are looking for long-term funds have probably stored in the transparent pool.
Yeah.
Because there is existing like tooling and things for long-term hardware wallet support, for instance.
Yeah.
We haven't really had shielded support on hardware wallets until Keystone, until very recently. And so I would posit that of the people who care about Zcash as a store of funds long-term, they are probably currently using transparent, or they are technical and using shielded in some way. If they're technical using shielded, they're also likely on the ball for like doing more updates and things because they've already done the work to start using shielded. It's the long-term transparent ones that I find is the how do we service that need while still having the flexibility to respond to security things as we need to. The most obvious one in this case is the threat of quantum computers, which, depending on who you talk to, that threat could be anywhere from 15 to 30 years out to 2 to 3 years out. And every single payment protocol that Zcash currently has is broken by quantum computers, transparent included. So it is impossible to treat the transparent pool as a long-term store of funds if you consider quantum computers to be a threat. So there are ways that we could potentially deal with this, and maybe that gets into some of your later questions. But in terms of a downside to removing transparent, I would argue that the fact that there are many people using it as a store as opposed to a payment thing is probably one of the largest ones.
Okay, let's get into the next question, which is what would deprecating the transparent pool actually look like in practice? How big of an engineering effort is it? And like what steps would be taken, and more importantly, like the timing, right? Because timing very much matters.
So the obvious first piece is make sure that for every use case that we as a community care about, we have feature parity in shielded.
Okay.
So I described that at the protocol level, I think we have feature parity everywhere that we care about now, but there is still engineering work that needs to happen there, both in terms of, we've got the work finishing Frost keygen and wallet usage that's going to start soon. We have the disclosure stuff, which if someone wanted to work on that, that would be great work to do. There's the outreach to exchanges, as you described. There's the understanding what exchanges are struggling with, and is it budgetary constraints on their part? Is it time resource constraints? Is it jurisdictional problems in the area that they're in? Legal problems. We know, for instance, that Gemini does withdrawals to shielded. So they under the MYDFS scheme, which is one of the most heavily regulated ones in the world, they are happy dealing with shielded. They don't store on shielded, and is that a internal legal reason, or is that just a technical reason? Technical things can be solved. We just have to find the right people to talk to and the right people to, get the right elliptic curves in the right places, and Bob's your HSM. And so we have those kinds of initial things that need to be worked on. Then there's what does the deprecation of transparent actually look like? And for that, we can look towards what we've already done for the Sprout pool. So for the Sprout pool, the first thing we did was we turned off the ability to, actually the only thing we've done so far, is we turned off the ability to send funds into the Sprout pool. You could still move funds around in the Sprout pool, but you could only either move funds inside or withdraw them. You can't move funds in. The second thing we would like to be able to do with the Sprout pool, but we can't for technical reasons, is to be able to turn off the ability to do transactions that are solely in the Sprout pool. So only allow things to go out. We have that functionality for Sapling and Orchard. There's consensus flags that if a consensus update changes what those flags are, then you can't do internal things anymore. And then we would need some sort of mechanism in wallets and things to start moving those funds out of transparent. We need ecosystem outreach in terms of going okay, these, this is what you're storing in, these are the alternatives, documentation and marketing and all that. If we were motivated and had nothing else on our plates, 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
I think would be.
It sounds like a massive undertaking.
I think it is a massive undertaking. But if we were doing nothing else, I think 2 to 3 years would be fine. If we, with everything else that's going on, I think it would be a fair bit longer.
Okay, great.
Oh, I wanted to add on a step to that process that I advocated at a previous ZCon for a general a general shielded pool retirement sort of sequence that I think I would like us to use a consistent sequence. So there would be a step near the end where we start applying a fee to the funds that slowly ramps up to 100%. Because once the pool is turned off, any funds that are there they're basically deleted. So technically that's like 100% fee. But the idea of having this ramping fee is to give people time to notice and react. And for transparent specifically, I also think it would be good to do a step, and I think we could do it relatively soon, within a couple of years.
Yeah.
Which would be require larger transaction fees.
More transparent.
Yeah, for transparent, and then maybe slowly turn that up, or turn it up every now and then, and see what issues that causes. So do people show up at our door and they're like, oh no, my exchange is ruined now because the fees are too high? That would be really good information. And at that point we could be like, oh well, there's already wallets you can migrate to. You should probably do that soon and you'll save on fees maybe.
I really like this idea, but one thing I want to tie into this is using the NSM to burn those fees, right? I think that seems like a pretty good use case for gradually trying to.
Yeah. I'm generally of that opinion for all of the pools, transparent and shielded, is if we get to the point where a pool is empty and if the community has gone through this long tail of giving a chance for people who didn't notice that 10 years ago we finally finished this off, and we're still doing that. At some point, again, we've reduced the burden on devs and things by moving more of it off the chain. But even just maintaining the withdrawal and recovery process is something. And at some point going, either way, fee ramping or something going, cool. Well, the rest of this, if it goes into the NCM, then it goes into the security budget for the rest of the network.
Exactly.
So, so obviously that kind of thing would need to be like voted on and whatnot, and widely considered and have a decent lead time, because you can't just say, oh, if you didn't react within 6 months, then your funds are gone. That's irresponsible.
Yeah.
Another thing that a colleague of mine, Chris Nutticum, suggested was that as another way to go about this. So when I described Sprout, I said we turned off going into the pool first, but you could still do things in. His idea was turn off transactions within the pool, but still allow you to go in and out. So if we did that with Transparent, what that is doing is disabling Transparent as a payment mechanism while retaining its capability as a storage mechanism.
Yep.
So that would still let everyone who is storing funds in HSMs or in their, in the key in their backyard that they've forgotten where it is and they need to go start digging with a metal detector. Those use cases would all still work, but the active payments flows would stop working because it would be like a reverse text address. You would, in order to spend from Transparent, you would have to first move into Shielded, and then you could make a payment. And actually, as a side note, that would also disable text addresses because you couldn't do a transparent to transparent payment anymore.
Yeah.
But that could be another like point in the design space for migration where we say, okay, we know that Shielded is good enough now to replace all transparent payment flows. Let's replace all the transparent payment flows. But we still allow people like Gemini, like the other exchanges and that, to still keep their funds in, custodied in Transparent if they're still at the moment what works for them, and have the deprecation process for the storage use case maybe be on a longer time scale.
Okay. Final questions about governance. So how should the Zcash community gauge sentiment on whether or not to deprecate the transparent pool? Typically, we use something like Zcap or ZAC along with coin holders. Feels like that might not be appropriate in this situation because it would probably not include a lot of people who hold on exchanges or with custodians or in hardware wallets, right? So, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think the Zcap and the other mechanisms that have traditionally been used are very good for sentiment analysis on this kind of topic. Given that this deals with significant amounts of coin being held by people, I think the coin holder voting is also important. If we only support coin holder voting in the Orchard pool, then people have to move their funds into a Shielded pool to be able to vote, and then they've moved them out of the transparent pool.
Well, yeah, and
So that's an option, but also, there are much easier coin holder voting mechanisms that you can do with Transparent because the funds are transparent. We can see them all. You can just sign messages to, per some voting system. So there are things that we could do from that perspective to go okay, what if 60 or 70% of what's in the Transparent pool said, yeah, we commit to moving our funds out of the Transparent pool.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient?
Go ahead.
I definitely think pulling coin holders could be important. But this one's really tricky because actually this is tricky always with gauging user sentiment, because I feel like generally in any system or technology, there's a bunch of users who rely on something and like it and want to keep using it. But they're not very aware of its development. They just expect it to be a thing that keeps working. And this is especially true for long-term holders who have buried a key, which is a super challenging use case. And I don't know what to do about that. Because it's easy to imagine a long-term holder who's buried a key might not even be paying attention to any governance referenda or not. Or maybe they would be, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure there would be enough users who wouldn't be aware of it. One thing I like about fees is that it forces users to be aware of it when they pay the fee. So it works better for transaction fees. It doesn't really work about the other kind of fee I was talking about, which is a storage fee, which is it's a penalty basically for
sticking around in the pool.
Yeah, for sticking around in a pool at the very end of the life cycle. The problem with that is if you've buried a key, you still won't notice that until, so yeah, I don't know how to grapple with that specific challenge of notifying all users.
It's
Like,
incredibly
this is-
challenging.
Yeah. So I think right now the best we could aim for would be coin holder sentiment and
I think you'd want to have a big announcement where you tell everybody in order to show your support, move to a shielded pool.
yeah,
And-
there's one other piece. Oh yeah, two other pieces now. Like one kind of coin sentiment is we can just look at the size of the pool. So if in the future there's very little transparent, or we can look at transparent traffic and see that coins are held for a short amount of time in transparent, those would be really useful signals. I was going to say, also one last piece about governance is I kind of like the ultimate ideal governance in my mind would include existing users who want to keep using Zcash, but maybe not users who are ambivalent or not interested in using Zcash moving forward. And then it would also include people who are very likely to become Zcash users or could be persuaded. But that's even harder. But right, ideally, if there were a contingent of people who are like, Zcash seems pretty nice, if it would just change a little bit in this particular direction, it'd be interesting to hear from them too. But anyway.
Now, the long-term storage part is definitely the sort of the hardest thing to grapple with here. Like I know I've talked to a couple of people who've talked about like, their expectations around Zcash being able to be around long enough that it can be inherited. So that's on the order of like a generation. We're talking 30, 50, 100 years in terms of the life cycle then. I think the advantage here is that I am of the opinion that quantum computers will eventually become reality, and so nothing that is currently present here is long-term storable on that timescale. So to me, that makes the design space a bit easier in that we know that there is an impossibility result here, that like we will not be like people who store their funds. If someone bought ZEC in 2016, chucked it in the ground and has not paid attention to the network for the last decade and will not pay attention for the next 50 years, then they are very likely going to lose their funds due to quantum computers.
Mm-hmm.
So with that design thing in mind, what I'm looking at here is, okay, if we can't actually provide long-term storage with the network as it is, but we have users who are expressing a desire or a demand for it, what protocol changes can we make to enable a long-term storage pool, for instance? We've had some discussion about this in the summit and a few earlier things where, like, if you're thinking about something that it will be a quantum resilient storage pool, and that is low on maintenance burden, low on technical burden. It doesn't support payments. It supports like you can store funds in and then you can pull funds out, to and from the actual payment protocol that you're using. If we had something like that, and Zcash users want that as a feature, that they can long-term store funds denominated in ZEC, maybe with privacy, maybe with not. That's details to get into. But if that's something that people want, that can be designed and planned and put in place and become something that those people who are currently using transparent as their long-term storage protocol can transition to, which will then also move funds out of the transparent pool. So it's about, from my view there, it's about acknowledging the fact that people have taken that view, whether or not it was an accurate view. They've taken that view of Zcash and are operating under that model, and how can we go about accommodating them as where we can, while still enabling the Zcash network to be able to evolve and maintain its security and privacy in the ways that we wish it to.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I do like that idea, and one reason is that it just distinguishes. So the long-term storage would need to be distinguishable, I think, and that means we know the intended use of that. Whereas with transparent funds that are sitting unmoved, we're not fully sure. It could be lost keys, could be long-term storage, or
Yeah.
it might not be. Like, there might be some other.
That could be a liquidity pool or an exchange, or any number of things could be just storing funds there. It could be, I want to store in Shielded, but we didn't have hardware support, or I don't currently trust Keystone. But when Ledger support for Shielded comes along, maybe then we'll see a big move there. Who knows?
Okay. So yeah, this was a great conversation. Do you guys have any final thoughts that you want to add on this topic?
Yeah, so I still am interested in raising fees for transparent usage relatively soon, but yeah, I would want to start that modestly. So, like, let's say the current zip is at 317, the fee schedule. The current fees are very low for that. So maybe bumping up transparent. By the way, this is an idea I haven't talked to any other Zcashers about, so I don't know
You have now.
what other developers would think. But bumping that up, something that it seems like pretty practical, like it's still a really low fee, but would be noticeable for high volume users, to see if we get a response. So it's sort of like putting out a signal, and maybe we can also do that in a way that's what do you call it? Like, it's not immediately enforced. It's like sort of advisory, so that those users might notice like their transactions take longer to confirm or something. Just ways to gently poke them and be like, hey, how much does this use case, how important is it to you? I like that idea. I guess that's and the other thing is, yes, I want to see more new functionality implementing existing use cases, rolling out using new technology in good products. And if we get enough of that, then I would feel a lot more confident to turn off transparent.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm glad we're having this conversation now. We've had similar conversations at various different venues and different scales at various points. I think that we should be having a more concrete discussion about, what timescale the Zcash ecosystem would be happy with considering as the deprecation period for transparent, but also any shielded pool. We have already started the process of deprecating Sprout. A proposed candidate zip for NU7 is to turn off V4 transactions, which would freeze the Sprout pool. We have an idea for how to accommodate that actually using ZSAs, where we would take it, if this would not be an NU7, but an idea for how to deal with the remainder in the Sprout pool is that the balance, which I think is about 25,000 at the moment,
That sounds right.
It is slowly dropping, so there's still plenty of time. Although please get your funds out of the Sprout pool if you're using it in there, please. But an idea we had for that is to take, when on-chain support turns off, take the set of funds there and create a synthetic ZSA that represents Sprout and add to the network a thing where you can burn one of these synthetic Sprout for deducting 1x from the Sprout pool or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so then the checking of, yes, you can provide a proof that you have Sprout funds. You can provide that to some trusted entity outside Zcash, and they then issue the synthetic Sprout to you in response to your proof that you have unspent Sprout funds. And we could do a similar thing with transparent, where we lock up what's in transparent, and then you provide proof that you own these transparent funds in exchange for some synthetic transparent that you can either trade within the pool or you can withdraw it, and when you burn it, it burns for one, deducting one from the transparent pool, for instance. And then maybe that process also has like a fee that goes up over time, for instance. But that's a way of like taking the cost from on the pool to off the pool. But yeah, that's an idea we have for that, but which I probably should have put in the early section. But in general, like any of these processes is going to take time. Any like role is going to take time. I want to really establish like what are our timelines now, particularly as like, if we're looking at Tachyon at a new pool, we need to set expectations now for those users who didn't notice that we set expectations in 2016.
Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, one other thought is I don't know how feasible this is, but if there were significant consensus among developers or the community that we should deprecate transparent, then actually probably the first step is just like post a statement to try to get the word out and see if we get responses that way.
Yeah, good idea. Okay, anything else?
No. Thank you for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for your time and safe travels home. Appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.